Hey friends, Lord of the Rings is coming to Magic the Gathering, and with it comes 4 brand new Lord of the Rings Commander pre-constructed decks. I covered 3 of the decks already on this channel, and now I'm covering the final deck, Elven Council. This is a blue-green deck focused on 2 main themes, voting and elves. The deck comes with 20 brand new cards that are exclusive to the pre-constructed deck, and the rest of the deck is filled with reprints with brand new Lord of the Rings artwork and flavor text straight from the books. The deck is super sweet and flavorful, and I can't wait to dive into the cards, but before we begin, 2 quick reminders. First, if you want to buy these decks or any other Magic the Gathering products, you can head on over to our sponsor, cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. And number 2, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss our Commander content as it comes out. Alright, we begin with the face commander of the deck. This is Galadriel, Elven Queen. This is a 4-mana Simic 4/5 legendary creature elf noble with Will of the Council. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if another elf entered the battlefield under your control this turn, starting with you, each player votes for Dominion or Guidance. If Dominion gets more votes, the ring tempts you, then you put a +1/+1 counter on your ring bearer. If Guidance gets more votes or is tied, draw a card. I think the card text is evoking that moment where Galadriel is choosing whether or not to take the ring for herself or help Frodo and the Fellowship on their way. And I think that's really cool how they encapsulated that moment in actual card design. However, in terms of raw power, I think Galadriel is the weakest face commander of the 4 precons. I think for most cases, you just want to be drawing a card, but your opponents could just make sure that you're just being tempted by the ring instead, which is fine. It's still a boon, but it's not a great boon. And odds are you're only going to get this trigger once per turn on your turn. So the power ceiling of this is very low. However, as you're going to see in this deck, Elven Council, this precon, has very subtle power. The cards look worse than they play. And that sounds really bad. That sounds like a backhanded compliment, but it's really true. This is more of a controlling politics deck that really wants to hang back and chill while everybody else builds a more threatening board state. And you're going to be helping out here and there, lending your guidance to the rest of the table to take out the arch enemies. And eventually, once everybody's resources are depleted, this deck is very good at drawing a little bit of incremental value over here while not drawing too much attention to themselves. And then once everybody's depleted on resources, you swoop in to win the game. So Galadriel is far from the only commander you can run on the stock list. There's actually a bunch of other Simic legendaries that can immediately go into the command zone. We've got 3 more legendary Simic creatures here that deal with voting, and some of them I would say are even stronger than the face commander. Arrestor of the Council is a 3-mana Simic 2/4 legendary creature elf noble that says whenever players finish voting, each opponent who voted for a choice you voted for creates a treasure token. You scry X, where X is the number of opponents who voted for a choice you didn't vote for. Draw a card. So Arrestor says whenever you're voting, you're going to be drawing a card. That's guaranteed. And then you're going to also be making some amount of treasure tokens and some amount of scrying as well. Now this one I think is going to be the strongest commander in the command zone just in the stock list. The deck has a lot of cards that allow you to vote, but very few voting payoff cards. So having one of the only payoff cards in the command zone means you're going to always have access to it, and this is by far the strongest payoff card for voting in the entire deck, so might as well put it in the command zone in my opinion. So if you're looking for just a raw power swap without changing the stock list, I would do number 1, put Arrestor into the command zone, and I think the deck just automatically gets stronger from there. But at the same time, keep in mind that will paint a larger picture on your deck as well. So there's always a trade-off here. Subtle power versus raw power. And Arrestor is the raw power side, whereas these other commanders are more of the subtle power. So moving on, we have Sirdain the Shipwright. This is another Simic legendary. It's a 5-mana, 3/4 legendary creature elf noble with Vigilance and Secret Counsel. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, each player secretly votes for a player, then those votes are revealed. Each player draws a card for each vote they received. Each player who received no votes may put a permanent card from their hand onto the battlefield. So this is all about politics and subterfuge. This card seems like it's trying to help everybody, but it's really trying to be as much of a jerk as possible. Because the real strategy with this one is to vote for the person with the most cards in hand to get more cards so they can't put any of their cards from their hand onto the battlefield for free. Whereas the person who's empty-handed, you don't want to vote for them because they won't have any permanents to put onto the battlefield. So it's very sneaky. You could be a real jerk about it, or you could be real nice about it. If somebody's empty-handed, you can try to curry favor with them by voting for them in secret so they can draw some cards. So I really like the politics angle of Sardane. I really like this a lot. And next, we have another 5-mana legendary Simic creature. This is Elrond of the White Council. This can also be your commander if you so choose. It's a 3/3 legendary creature elf noble with also Streaker Council. When Elrond enters the battlefield, each player secretly votes for fellowship or aid, then those votes are revealed. For each fellowship vote, the voter chooses a creature they control. You gain control of each creature chosen this way, and they gain this creature can't attack its owner. Then for each aid vote, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So if you already have a huge creature army, then the aid vote gets a lot better because it's pumping up your team. Whereas if you don't have a lot of creatures on your side of the battlefield, you'd much rather steal your opponent's creatures with fellowship. And a savvy opponent will choose wisely accordingly to that too. Now, if that wasn't enough, we have 2 more legendary creatures that can be your commander, but I would highly recommend against it, at least for the stock Precon. We have 2 of the wizards, Gandalf, Westward Voyager, and Radagast, Wizard of the Wilds. Both of these wizards care about you casting spells with mana value 5 or greater, which is not a theme of this deck at all, really. Like, yes, there are some spells that will trigger both Gandalf and Radagast, but that's not a theme of the deck, so it's kind of weird that they're kind of here, but whatever. So starting with Gandalf, Westward Voyager is a 5-mana, 5/5 legendary creature avatar wizard that says whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, each opponent reveals the top card of their library. If any of those cards share a card type with the spell, copy that spell, you may choose new targets for the copy, and each opponent draws a card. Otherwise, you draw a card. So Gandalf cares about high mana value spells, 5 or greater, and also card types. So if you have spells that have multiple card types, like creature enchantment, creature artifact, blah, 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 you're going to have more chances of hitting off your opponents and copying their spells off their library. Now, your opponents get to draw a card, but that's more of a consolation prize because you're essentially drawing a card and casting that spell for free because you're making a copy of it. Also, they're going to enter the battlefield as permanents, token permanents. So if you have any populate or anything, that gets even better as well. And worst case scenario, you're just going to be drawing a card. So Gandalf to me is basically if you want to play Emoti at your table, but Emoti is just too powerful because Emoti is very, very strong. It's more of like the high end of mid power, I would say, if built correctly. And Gandalf basically takes the same idea of Emoti where you're just Simic, cast high mana value spells, and brings that down to a more casual level, to a more low to mid power level. So if you like the playstyle of Emoti, I think Gandalf is a worthy replacement if you are playing at a lower power level. And then we have Radagast, Wizard of the Wilds. This cares about high mana value, 5 or greater, but also birds and beasts. So it's a 4-mana, 3/5 legendary creature avatar wizard with Ward 1, and beasts and birds you control have Ward 1, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, choose 1, create a 3/3 beast creature token, or create a 2/2 bird creature token with flying. So generally speaking, birds are on the lower end of 5 mana. They're kind of cheaper. So if you're going bird tribal, I don't think you want Radagast to be your commander. I don't even know if you'd want him to be your commander if you're beast tribal, but I think beasts have less options there. You want to be high mana value. He's just going to give your stuff a board state. You're casting high mana value stuff. You're getting another creature onto the battlefield. They have wards, so they're a little bit harder to pick off. That's all fine and good. I think this is just going to be in the 99 of a beast and bird deck, and it's fine here too. It doesn't really have synergy with the main themes of the deck, so they're a little bit weird. I wouldn't recommend them in the command zone of the stock list, but they're here. That's cool, I guess. All right, moving on to the other cards. All right, so these cards can't be the commander of the stock list, but nonetheless, they are very, very cool. So let's go through them all. We first got Haldir Lorien Lieutenant. This is X and a green for a 0/0 legendary creature elf soldier that says Haldir enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. It has vigilance, and you can pay 6 mana, 5 and a green, to until end of turn. Other elves you control gain vigilance and get +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Haldir. So like I said, this deck is all about elves and voting. So this definitely leads on the elf side and gives your deck a finisher, which is really important because the deck kind of like dirtles around and plays politics and stuff. And then eventually you'll just drop Haldir and you'll have like a bunch of elves on the battlefield and you'll dump your mana into Haldir's ability and you'll win the game. So this is like how the deck actually wins. And then we've got Arwen, Weaver of Hope. This is a 3-mana green, 2/1 legendary creature elf noble. Each other creature you control enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it, equal to Arwen's toughness. So Arwen has 1 toughness at the beginning, and all your creatures are going to enter the battlefield with 1 +1/+1 counter on it, which is not bad. Like, Renata does the same thing as this for 4 mana. But Arwen actually scales up, and she's just a 3-drop. So if you have any ways of pumping Arwen's toughness, like giant growth effects, anything like equipment, then Arwen's starting to put a lot of counters on your creatures, and that can get out of control really, really fast. Arwen's like low-key just a really, really good card, honestly. And then we've got Legolas Greenleaf. This is another 3-mana green legendary creature. It's a 2/2 legendary creature elf archer with reach. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. And whenever another legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Legolas. And whenever Legolas deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So Legolas cares about legendary creatures. Legendary creatures mattering isn't really a supported theme of the deck, but we just so happen to have a lot of legendary creatures, both in the standard set of Lord of the Rings, where it's actually a main mechanic, and in this Precon 2, where there just happens to be a lot of legendary creatures. So Legolas, even in this deck, even though legendary creatures mattering is not like a main focus of the deck, Legolas is going to grow really, really big, really fast. And being able to have pseudo-evasion, being a good blocker, and being able to draw cards whenever you deal damage just makes Legolas really, really efficient. Like, this is a great card as well. And then we've got our first non-legendary creature. This is Mirkwood Trapper. It's a 3-mana Simic 1/4 creature elf scout. And it says, whenever a player attacks you, target attacking creature gets -2, -0 until end of turn. And whenever a player attacks, if they aren't attacking you, that player chooses an attacking creature. It gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So this is a nice political card. It deters attacks against you because those creatures get a little bit smaller. And it encourages your opponents to attack each other because they can get a little bit stronger as well. So it's not an oppressive, it doesn't stop your opponents from attacking you for lethal or whatever, but it's a nice subtle deterrent. It's also a 1/4 blocker itself. So early to mid game, this is going to make your opponents attack each other more often than not, which is really nice. Then we've got Mirkwood Elk. This is a 6-mana green, 6/6 elk creature with trample. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, return target elf card from your graveyard to your hand. You gain life to that card's power. So this is a great top end for an elf deck. ETBs, gains you some life, puts an elf back into your hand, and whenever you're attacking, you get to repeat that process. And that's exactly what you want from a late game card. You want card advantage and cards specifically from your graveyard because your graveyard is going to be filled over time, and gaining some life because you're going to be getting hits throughout the game and you want to get out of the red zone. So this is really nice. And then we've got our first Trixie spell, and this deck is all about Trixie spells as we move to instants. So first is Trap the Trespassers. This is a blue 3-mana instant that says Secret Council. Each player secretly votes for a creature you don't control, then those votes are revealed. For each creature with 1 or more votes, put that many stun counters, then tap it. So this card is working best when you can kind of work with your opponents to basically tap down all the creatures your arch enemy opponent at the table has. So let's say there's an arch enemy at the table, they're accruing too much value, and they're threatening to win the game if they get to untap. You can work with your other opponents to say, okay, I'm going to vote for this creature, you vote for that creature, and the other person votes for that creature. Tap down their army, and then everybody swings for lethal and takes them out. Or if somebody is starting to swing at you for lethal, if you're the arch enemy, you can secretly at least tap down one creature, hopefully tap down multiple creatures as well. And it deals with voting, so that's great too. But we have 2 even better instant tricks in my opinion. First, we've got Windswift Slice, which is a 3-mana instant that says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Create a number of 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens equal to the amount of excess damage dealt this way. So we have a couple creatures in our deck that get really, really big, really, really quick, such as Legolas that we just talked about, or like Mirkwood Elk is already a 6/6. So not only is this instant speed removal once you have a big creature on the battlefield, but you can put also a bunch of elf warrior creature tokens on the battlefield at instant speed too. So those can be additional surprise blockers or surprise attackers when you get to untap. So I really like this card. And then we've got Galadrim Ambush. This is a 4-mana green instant that says create X 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens, where X is a number of attacking creatures. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by non-elf creatures. It's essentially a one-sided fog for your opponents. So if you're being attacked for a lethal amount of damage or just a lot of damage, you can cast this, negate all the damage that's coming at you, and even better, you make a bunch of elves, and those elves can probably take out some of the attackers as well. So this is just a savage beatdown in an elf deck. Or if you want to swing out at somebody, you can swing out if they block or whatever. You can prevent all the damage from those blockers, so you can just make combat even better for you. And you make a bunch of elves as well as blockers for the future or future attackers. So Galadrim Ambush, I think, is just going to be a staple for elf decks. This card is so sweet. Moving on, we have more instant trickery with Sail into the West. This is a 3-mana Simic instant with Will of the Council, so deals with voting. Starting with you, each player votes for Return or Embark. If Return gets more votes, each player returns up to 2 cards from their graveyard to their hand, then you exile Sail into the West. If Embark gets more votes or is tied, each player may discard their hand and draw 7 cards. Your opponents get more value out of this than you do, but it is a voting card, and you have cards that care about voting, so this kind of works in your favor as well. And again, this is just like trying to curry favor with the table. You want to be helping people out so people aren't attacking you and they're attacking each other instead. And then we've got Raise the Palisade. This is a 5-mana blue sorcery that says choose a creature type, return all creatures that aren't of the chosen type to their owner's hand. So this is a tribal way of being an asymmetrical bounce spell. It's not quite Cyclonic Rift, but it's like Cyclonic Rift at home for your tribal decks. So in the elf deck, all your creatures are basically elves, so you just bounce everything that isn't an elf, and you have a clear board state either to slow down your opponents for multiple turns as they have to rebuild, or just removes all potential blockers so you can swing in for lethal at the end. And then we have another vote card, Travel Through Caradhras. This is a 6-mana green sorcery that has Council's Dilemma. Starting with you, each player votes for Redhorn Pass or Mines of Moria. For each Redhorn Pass vote, search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. If you search your library this way, shuffle. For each Mines of Moria vote, return a card from your graveyard to your hand. Exile Travel Through Caradhras. So no matter what, you get to get at least 1 vote in your favor. So you're either going to be getting a basic land card, or you're going to be getting a card from your graveyard back to your hand. And then your opponents get to decide whether or not they want to give you more basic land cards to be ramped into the battlefield, or give you more cards from your graveyard. And that, I think, is just going to depend on what cards you have in your graveyard and how much lands you have on the battlefield, essentially. And then we move on to the artifacts. We have Lothlorien Blade. This is a 3-mana artifact equipment that is basically just for elves. Whenever a equipped creature attacks, it deals damage equal to its power to target a creature defending players' controls. You have Equip Elf 2 and Equip 5. So if you equip it to an elf, it only costs 2 mana. If you equip it to any non-elf, it costs 5. But this card is really sweet. If you have a big power creature, especially a big power elf, like Legolas, for example, this is just like a repeatable removal spell on an equipment, which is awesome. Now, elves are generally tiny, but again, we have some elves that get really, really big very, very quickly. And so if you can slap on the blade onto a big power elf, this card is going to do serious work for you. Moving on, we have the 2 remaining brand new cards that are exclusive to the deck. We have Model of Unity, a 3-mana artifact, and this is the other payoff card, the new payoff card for voting. Whenever players finish voting, you and each opponent who voted for a choice you voted for may scry 2. And then you can tap it and add 1 mana of any color. So this is a subtle incentive for your opponents to vote the exact same way as you, because then they get a little bit of a benefit. They get the scry 2. And you always get to scry 2 whenever you're voting, so it's always nice. And then the final new card that is exclusive to the deck is Song of Erandril. This is a 5-mana Simic Saga with 3 chapters. Chapter 1 says scry 2, then draw 2 cards. Chapter 2 is create a treasure token and a 2/2 blue bird creature token with flying. And chapter 3 is put a flying counter on each creature you control without flying. So this card is gas. The first chapter is actually just really good. 5 mana, scry 2, then draw 2 cards. Like, that's not a perfect rate or anything, but it's pretty decent. And then number 2 is you just ramp a little bit, you make a token. But number 3 is the really good one. Making all your creatures suddenly fly is a great way to just end games. Suddenly your entire board has evasion and you go in for the kill. So that is really, really nice. Alright, the rest of the deck is filled with reprints, but all the reprints have Lord of the Rings artwork and Lord of the Rings flavor text straight from the book. So the entire deck from top to bottom is Lord of the Rings themed and everything is on flavor. So that is awesome. And some of the reprints are pretty high value too. So we begin with Arbor Elf, which is just a mana dork, great to see. Elvish Mystic, another mana dork. Elvish Visionary, it's an elf that cantrips and is a good blocker and it deals with elf synergy, that's always nice. Elvish War Master, now this is a great one in the elf deck, it's from Kaldheim, I believe. It makes elf tokens whenever you're playing elves, and it doubles as a mana sink finisher. It gives your creatures +2/+2 and death touch until end of turn. So we love flexible ways of having elves that enter the battlefield early, that deal with elf synergy, put some blockers on the table, and then double up as finishers later. This card is great. Moving on, we have more elves. Paradise Druid, another mana dork. Woe's Pathfinder. This is not an elf, but it is a mana dork, and it also is a nice mana sink at the end. Makes stuff bigger. It's fine. We've got an elf staple of Elvish Archdruid. It's just a little anthem effect, and it's like a mana dork on steroids in this deck. Farhaven Elf, another mana dork that ramps you. Reclamation Sage, an elf that destroys an artifact or enchantment. Wood Elves, another elf that ramps you. Celeborn the Wise, it's from the main set. It adds a little bit of scrying and grows into a serious threat. Elvish Piper, it's an elf that cheats on mana when you're putting your other elves onto the battlefield, or just big creatures. Realm Seekers is an elf that is really, really big, and it will get lands into your hand, which is nice. Colossal Whale, which is, I don't know why it's in the deck, whatever, okay. Hornet Queen, I can understand a little bit more. It's an insect, it puts a bunch of insects on the battlefield, those aren't elves, but it makes attacking you very, very bad, so that's great. And if anybody's a monarchy, you can steal the monarchy and basically hold on to it very easily. And then we have sorceries and instants. Elven Farsight is just a nice little cantrip. This deck probably needs a little bit more creatures for Elven Farsight to be super consistent, but if you get the Scry 3, odds are you're going to find a creature card and draw it. Then we've got Opt with new art, that's pretty nice. Preordain, pretty nice. Swan Song, this is a high value reprint. I think this card is like $10 or higher. It's a premier counter magic in the format, one of my favorites actually, so I love to see it here. Sylvan Offering, this card is such gas. Not only is it currying favor with your opponents and allowing you to team up to take out an arch enemy, but it just generates so much value for you. Like you get a tree folk token that's huge, you get so many elf warriors. This is like one of the most mana efficient token generators in the format. Awesome stuff. Then we've got Growth Spiral, just a good card. Heroic Intervention, this is another high value reprint. This card is quite expensive and is just like a staple in green decks. It's one of the best protection spells in the format. Inscription of Abundance, deals with counters, gaining life, fighting, all instant speed, so that deals with like the trickery aspect of the deck. Rampant Growth, just, staple ramp. Beast Within, one of the best removal spells in the format. Cultivate, staple ramp. Genesis Wave, one of the best format finishers. This deck probably needs more permanence for it to be even stronger, but even so, in the stock list, this is a great way to go from a board state with nothing to basically winning the game in a turn. Learn from the past. This is a flavorful way of like showing that when Gandalf found out about the ring, that Frodo's ring was actually the One Ring. That's really cool. That said, this card is not really great. It's instant speed, so it deals with the trickery aspect of the deck, but whatever. Moving on, we have Plea for Power. We have a vote card that's really solid. You either draw cards or take an extra turn. Devastation Tide. This deck has a little bit of scrying going involved, so that makes miracle spells a little bit better. Lorien Revealed, Island Cycling, Flexible Card Draw. Mystic Confluence, you love to see Mystic Confluence. Instant Speed, Trickery, very flexible spell. Overwhelming Stampede, this is one of the best finishers in the entire deck. We've seen a bunch of elves that just get really, really big, and Overwhelming Stampede is a great way to just turn all your other smaller elves into a game-winning threat that can swing for lethal. Seeds of Renewal, just a good value. Graveyard Recursion. We have Sol Ring. It's probably not going to be this Sol Ring, but I couldn't find the art, the real art that's going to be in the deck, but this is the elf like serialized cool version. That's the promo version. Arcane Signet, it's a staple for a reason. Lightning Greaves is another high value reprint. I think this card was like creeping up to $6 despite, being reprinted God knows how many times. Mirror of Galadriel from the main set. Commander Sphere, it's fine. Whisper Silk Cloak, it's a couple bucks as well. That's nice to see too. Lignify, super mean if you do it onto a commander because their commander is just stuck on the battlefield and they can't recast it and they have to kill their own creature before they can get their value back. Asceticism, another high value reprint. Creatures having hexproof is just really, really nice. And then we get to the lands. When I'm looking at lands in a precon, I just want stuff that enter the battlefield untap and tap for 2 or more colors if this is a deck that is 2 or more colors. Or it's a utility land that is such a good utility that it's worth running even if it doesn't mana fix. So for example, Ash Barrens, I don't really like in this deck, but Command Tower is literally perfect. Exotic Orchard, pretty nice. Field of Ruin, don't really like. Flooded Grove though, perfect, love it. Hinterland Harbor, this is a check land, it's worth a couple dollars. It's a great reprint here. Lonely Sandbar, Rejuvenating Springs, this is fantastic to see. This is a battle bond land. You typically don't get to see them in the Commander precons. I don't know why. They're literally made for Commander. But it's so great to see a reprint here of Rejuvenating Springs. I love to see it. Thornwood Falls, Tranquil Thicket, A Vine Glimmer Snarl, I mean, people poo-poo the reveal lands all the time, but you know what? In a 2-color deck, odds are it's going to enter the battlefield untapped, like at least 50% of the time, I would say. And then if it enters the battlefield tapped too, it's still better than, for example, a Woodland Stream. So worst case scenario, Vine Glimmer Snarl is a Woodland Stream that sometimes enters the battlefield untapped and is just like 10 times better. And then Woodland Stream is here too. That's great too. So some of the lands here, not so great. But at the very least, all of them have beautiful new Lord of the Rings artwork and flavor text. So I can give all of these a pass. And then the rest of the lands are all just basic forests and islands. This is a 2-color deck, so you could really run a lot of basics, so that's absolutely fine. And that's all the cards you're going to find in the Elven Council deck. Overall, I think the deck is really, really sweet. There's some weird inclusions, like the wizards, who don't really fit with the main themes of the deck. But for the most part, the deck is pretty cohesive, and it deals with voting and elves in a really unique way, and has some nice overlap between the 2 main themes. Now that I've covered all 4 of the pre-constructed decks, I'm going to be moving on to my Precon upgrade guide. And this time, I'm going to be providing 2 different upgrade paths for each of the decks. The first upgrade path is my usual $20 upgrades, but the second upgrade path is going to only use cards from Lord of the Rings. So I'm going to be looking at the main set and pulling any good voting cards and elf cards from there and putting them into the Precon deck. So that way you can upgrade your Precon while still keeping it top to bottom a purely Lord of the Rings themed deck. So if you like that sort of stuff, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss these videos as they're coming out. And until next time, friends, see ya!